Monkey.
Alright, so Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Mohamad Iskandar bin Mohamad, and this is my presentation for programming group assignment. Okay, so as we can see here, this is my question number 1. Alright, so from this question, I have simplified the question. So the question wants us to get users input of two integers between the range of 10 to 30 that we will assign as number 1 and number 2, and then to get an operator sign from the user, either plus or minus only, that we will assign as sign, and to get a response from the user whether the user want to continue the program or terminate the program after we have displayed the result, that we will assign as option. So the output would be result between two numbers and the chosen sign, and then we also need to ask the user again whether he or she want to repeat or end the program. So the task would be, if the user enter odd number or number not within the specified range, we need to show wrong inputs. Please answer a proper input. And if the user entered the wrong sign, we will also show the same thing. And we need to display clear input instruction before prompt from user to avoid input error. And we need to use switch statement to select operator. Alright, so as we can see here, this is the algorithm. We will begin with start, and then we can prompt and get number 1 and number 2 from the user along with the sign. The sign can only be plus or minus, and that number 1 and number 2 can only be even integers between the range of 10 to 30. So first we need to check for number 1 and number 2. We need to check whether they are greater than and equals to 10 and must be less than and equals to 30. So here we check for number 1. If number 1 is greater than and equals to 10, and also number 1 is less than and equals to 30, if it is true, we can check for number 2, check for the same thing. And then if number 2 is also true, we can check for the third condition, which is to check whether number 1 and number 2 are even integers or not, and that the sign convention for the operator must be plus or minus only. So if all of these conditions are true, then we can proceed to the next program. But if even one of these programs are false, we will show wrong inputs. Please insert a proper input, and then we will loop back and return back to the first statement, prompt and get from the user again. Alright. Alright, so if all of the conditions are true, we can proceed to the switch statement. Here we will check for the sign. In the case of sign is plus, we can display number 1 and number 2 and then display the sum of number 1 and number 2. But in the case of sign is minus, we will display number 1 and number 2 and display the difference of number 1 minus number 2. And every switch statement needs to have default. So here we can just put wrong inputs, please insert a proper input. But since we have put a condition that the sign needs to be plus or minus only, so the default is actually useless. And then we can prompt and get from the user whether the user want to repeat the program or not. So if the user want to repeat the program, the whole program, we can return back to the first statement, which is to prompt and get numbers from the user and also the sign from the user. But if the statement is and so this condition is false, we will terminate the program. Alright, so as we can see here, this is the coding in C++. Okay, so as usual, we need to have include IOStream and the namespace. Alright, so here I assign number 1, number 2 and valid as integer data type. So valid is actually for looping when the user entered the wrong input. And then I assign option and sign as character data type. Okay, so as you can see here, there are two do while loop. Okay, the first do is for the whole program looping if the user want to continue the program using option, and the second do is for wrong input looping. Okay, so as you can see here, I have displayed that the user need to enter two even integers between the range of 10 to 30 with an example of 12 or 14 or 20, and then the user need to enter an operation either plus for addition or minus for subtraction. Then we will get input number 1, number 2 and operation. Okay, so next we can see that here we need to check for the number 1 and number 2, same as in the algorithm. Okay, so number 1 and number 2 must be greater than 10 and less than 30. If that is true, then we can check for the second condition, which is to check whether number 1 and number 2 is an even integers or not. Okay, so if that is also true, we will check for the third condition, whether the sign is plus or minus only. So if one of these condition is false, we will display wrong inputs. Please insert a proper input, and then the value will equals to 2. If all of these conditions are true, value will be equals to 1. Alright, so here the value is used as the condition for the do while looping. Alright, so if value is equals to 2, if it is true, then we will back to the second do. Alright, so we will loop the whole program again, ask the user to input number 1, number 2 and sign again until it is correct. Okay, so if everything is correct, we will go to the switch statement. In the case of sign is plus, we will display like this. You have inserted number 1 as the first input and number 2 as the second input, and then we will display the result of addition between both input, which is number 1 plus number 2. But if the sign is minus, we will display the result of subtraction between both input is number 1 minus number 2. Alright, so switch statement must have break, and then we have default. Right, so after that the program will display, do you want to do another calculation, and ask the user to input y or n only. Right, so and that will be registered as option. So the program will loop again as long as the user enter y as the option. So if it is true, then return back to the first do. The first do is, as we can see here, it covers the whole program, which means that it will loop back everything in the program. Alright, so as we can see here, this is the output after I have run and compile the program. So I purposely input wrong number for number 2, which is an odd number. Alright, so it will display wrong input. Please insert a proper input, and it will loop back to ask the user to input new number and new operation. So here I inserted the correct number for number 1 and number 2, but the wrong operation sign. So it will also display the same thing, and then it will loop again to ask the user again. Alright, so here as you can see, I have inserted 20 as first number and 16 as the second number, and the operation sign is plus, which is correct. Everything here is correct. So the program will run and display the result of addition between both input is 36. Do you want to do another calculation? So I inserted y, and then it will loop back again everything. 28 as the first number, 12 as the second number, and the operation that I inserted is minus. So the result of subtraction between both input is 16. Alright, so do you want to do another calculation? And as in no. So the program will then terminate. Okay, so that's all for me. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Siti Nurfatehah, and let's talk about our assignment 1 for programming database system. We have question. We're going to do about question 2. When you run a program to find the frequency of each digit entered, and the digits are in integers. So this is our sample output, and the sample input is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So first of all, let's figure out about synthesizing this question. In synthesizing, we have input, process, and output. So the input that we're going to prompt is by variable num, which represent number, and then in our process, we will declare the variable of num and v as long integer data type, and declare the variable of a equal to 0 until j equal to 0 as integer because they represent the frequency of integer 0 until 9. And then we use decision of while loop with condition num is greater than 0. And we have the arithmetic expression of v equal to num modulus by 10, and num is equal to the previous num divided by 10. To explain about this, at first we have the input of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as our initial num value, and our v value during that time is 0 because it's input here that the num value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and the initial v value as 0 when we enter this loop. And then we will get v equal to num modulus by 10. And by dividing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by 10, we will get the remainder of 5. And then the latest num during that time will be divided by 10. So we have the latest value of 1, 2, 3, 4.5 as its num value for the first loop. And then we have the nested loop of switch with condition variable re. And then we have cases of integer from 0 until 9. On each cases, there will be increment of each frequency. And then for any non-integer keyed in, it will go to default and display invalid. And then after the condition of num is not bigger than 0, on which during that time the num value will be 0.1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It will exit this loop and display the frequency of each integer. To see about this clearly, we will start our program and declare our variables which are in long integer data type of num and variable, and we have integer of a until j equal to 0. Reminding again that a until j represent the frequency of each integer. And then we will prompt num. After we get prompting num, we will enter the loop of while on which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is bigger than 0. And then it proves to be true, and then we will enter the arithmetic expression. At first loop, the re number is 5, and the num value is 1, 2, 3.5. And then we will enter the switch of condition re, that variable. We have 5 re value, so we'll enter the case of 5. In 5, it's supposed to be true, and then f plus 5, which is f increment, will store the value of integer 5 by 1 because its frequency is just 1. If there happen to be 1, 2, 3, 4.5, if our value is 1, 2, 3, 5, 5, instead, at second loop, it will store in case 5 that f increment will store the value of 5 by 2 because its frequency is 2. That's an if. Okay, so after all of the conditions are satisfied on which the num value is not bigger than 0 again, it will exit this loop and display the frequency of number. And then this is the program. In this program, we have declared the variable over here, and then we prompt the num over here. And then we will enter the while loop. In while loop, this is the block of while. In while, we have the arithmetic progression over here, and then we have the switch block over here. It is a nested loop because it's a loop in a loop. Or in another way, it's a loop in a repetition. It's the same. And then we have switch on each pieces. If we have example 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At first, it will enter 5 as read. So it's entered in case 5, on which 5 increment, f increment, will store the value of 1. And then we have 4. remainder, 4 and 5 in remainder. And then it will enter the case of 4 for 1 frequency. E will store 1, F will store 1 during that time. And then we have 3 for 5. Case 3 of D will store the value of 1, E will store the value of 1, and F, as previously, will store the value of 1. And it will consecutively go through from the back to the front until the latest num is 0.112345, or any number or input that we put. From that, it will exit this while loop because it does not satisfy this condition and display the frequency of each integer. So click on F9 to compile. So we forgot that there's no syntax error. Let's figure out if there's any logic error in our program by clicking on F9 to execute our program. So we have the input of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sample. So let's see if it really does work. We have 0 frequency of 0 integer, yes. We have 1 frequency of 1, 2 frequency of integer 2, 1 frequency of integer 3, 4 and 5, and none integer of 6 until 9. So it proves to be right. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'll be talking about question 3, which is a quite simple question. First of all, I'll be reading the question and then I'll be showing the flowchart, and finally we're going to see the actual code, and then we're going to see the output. So without further ado, let's move on. So question 3. One problem in timber management is to determine how much of an area to leave uncut so that the harvested area is reforested in a certain period of time. It is assumed that reforestation takes place at a known rate per year, depending on climate and soil conditions. A reforestation equation expresses this growth as a function of the amount of timber standing and the reforestation rate. For example, so here is our first example, which is going to be our first clue in solving this code. For example, if 100 acres are left standing after harvesting and the reforestation rate is 0.05, then the equation would be 100 plus 0.05 times 100, and it would be giving us the value of 105 acres at the end of the first year. So for the upcoming year, we would have to take the previous value, 105 acres, and apply it into the same equation. So instead of using 100 again, we would use the updated value, which is 105 plus the reforestation rate of 0.05 times 105, which would give us the value of 110.25 acres. So let's move on to the actual question. Assume that the area has a total of 14,000 acres with 2,500 acres uncut and a reforestation rate of 0.02. So the key here is these values. These would be our variables in the upcoming code. So the question would want us to print a table showing the number of acres forested at the end of each year for a total of 20 years. So from this we can establish that this is a repetition question, or should we call a loop. The question would want us to repeat this step for 20 years or 20 times. So as we already have known the question, let's see the flowchart. Here's the flowchart. So first of all, of course, we have a start at the beginning, and then we would have to initialize the variables that we have according to the given parameters. So for the year, of course, we would have to start with the year 0 and move up to future, eventually year 20. So first of all, initialize the year to 0, the area to 14,000, uncut area to 2,500, and a growth rate to 0.02. Remember, these are the values that are given in the question. They are not magically spawned, they are given in the question. So moving on, we have to come to a decision. This is where our loop comes in. So the condition is, as long as the year is less than 20, the code will keep on looping itself. As it reaches 20, the condition has now become false, and the code would provide an output at the end and eventually end itself. So as long as the condition remains true, it moves on to calculate the forested area, which is equals to angka area plus angka area times the growth rate, which is 0.02. In the end, it will have to display the year along with the forested area in an orderly manner in a table, which would then come up to the end of our program. So for the year, we've established the increment of the year, which is year equals to year plus 1 or year plus plus. This is the increment value that we have set for the year. So for every loop, the year increases by 1 and not some weird numbers. So this is our calculation for angka area. So this is to update our angka area for every step. The equation would be angka area equals to angka area plus angka area times the growth rate. This would keep updating the value of the angka area each step along the way. But keep in mind that the angka area would seem irrelevant in the future code, because the question earlier stated that it only needed the number of acres forested at the end of each year. So let's move on to the actual code. For the code, so this here is the developed code. So as usual, the standard stuff, integer main. So here are the variables. So for the year, we have declared as integer. For the area, we have declared as double. Angka area also as double. Growth rate we declared as float. Forested area we declared as double. And we have initialized the values. For the year, 0. For the area, 14,000. For the angka area, 2,500. For the float, for the growth rate, which is 0.02. And the forested area, initially we start at 0. So here is some headers for the table, and here's the divider between the headers and the body of the table. So we're going to use a while loop, because to me this seems the most sensible type of loop that we can use depending on the questions, as we have been given a set amount of time of repetition. To me, it is sensible to use a while loop instead of other loops, because it makes things easier. As the year less than 20, it would continue with the code forested area equals to angka area plus angka area times by the growth rate. So this is we're updating the first value of the forested area, and then moving on, the code would calculate the angka area, which is angka area times growth rate. This is updating the angka area. And then the year increment, we have established year plus plus, which is year equals to year plus 1. And the code would continue to display the year and the forested area, which is in acres. So this whole thing would keep repeating itself until the year reaches just before 20. And in the end, the output it would state the total forested area for 20 years is the final forested area, which is in acres. So without further ado, let's compile the code and run the program, and we get the desired output, which is the year from the first year until the 20th year, and the area for the first year until the 20th year, which is starting from 2550 acres until 3714.87 acres. So the total forested area for 20 years is 3714.87 acres. So this is actually the correct values for the code that we have created. So this is actually already tested and the values are correct. Now I would not be showing the full calculations because that would take too long, and if you like, you could plug these into a calculator and you would get the final value of 3714.87 acres. That would be all from me, and thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Akmal Haziq and today I'm going to present question 4 for assignment 1. So we need to design a program that calculates how much money you will end up with if you invest an amount of money at a fixed interest rate compounded yearly. So the program should ask the user to give the initial amount of investment, the number of years, and the interest rate percent per year. And the program should tell the user how much money the user will have after the end of the period. Let's say the user gain 10 years, and after 10 years the user should have this much of money. And the program should also tell the user how much money the user will have at the end of every year. So let's take a look at the flowchart. So flowchart is an example of an algorithm. So an algorithm is used to help the programmer to construct a program. So this is a flowchart. This is the flowchart. So firstly we start and then we prompt and get initial value, years, and interest rate from the user. And then this is the looping part. We need to declare J, a variable used to control the looping condition. So J equals to 1. So if J is less or equal than the year, the number of year given by the user, which is the condition is true, so we will have this formula. Press process. The increment will be the initial value times the rate divided by 100, and the final value of the year will be the initial plus the increment. And we will declare the final value of the year as the initial value for the following year, which is for the following loop. And then we will display the final value for each year, and then the variable J will add by 1, will be increased by 1. So the loop will go on until the following condition is false. So once J is more or equal, once J is more than the number of year, the condition is false. So it will display the final value for the last year, which is the ultimate final value that the user will have, and the program should end. So that's basically it. So just a note here. So every variable here will store a value, and it can be changed. The value inside of the variable can be changed throughout the program. So let's have a look at the program here. So this is the basic structure of a C++ program. Firstly, we have to include IOStream, username space std, int main, and return value 0, and this will be the body of the program. So firstly we declare the variables. So year will be an integer data type, and the initial value, final value, rate, and increment will be in floating data type. So let's tell the user that this program will tell the user how much money the user will earn for that investment, and we will ask the user to enter the required details. So we will ask the user to enter the initial amount. So this will be the initial amount, and then the number of years, and then the interest rate percent per year. And then here comes the looping part. So we will be using the for loop. Alright, so for loop will have the condition and the control variable, and the control variable will add itself here. So we will set J equals to 1. So once J is still less than the number of year the user give, let's say 10, so the loop will be repeated until the number of year is, until the value of J is more than the number of year, let's say 11. So just like the flowchart, this will be the formula. The increment will be equals to the initial times the rate divided by 100, and the final value of the year will be initial plus the increment, and then we will declare the final value of the year as the initial value for the following year. So we will tell the user for every loop at the end of the year, of the first year or the second year, the third year, how much money the user will have. And then once the loop is done, so we will look at the final value, the ultimate final value that user will have after period of time that the user has given. So let's see what is happening in the loop here. So firstly, the variable j will hold the value 1, and then the system will compare the value of j with the number of year. So if 1 is less or equals to 10, the condition is true, and then the loop body will be executed. So it will calculate the increment value and the final value, and the program will tell the user how much money the user will have at the end of every year. Alright, at the end of the specific year, and then the system will declare the final value of the year as the initial value for the following loop, and then next the j will plus by 1, will be added by 1, and then the system will check it again if the new value of j, which is 2, is still less or equal to 10. If the question is true, then the same process will be repeated until the variable j holds the value of 11. Once the system compared, 11 is more than the number of year 10, so the loop will be terminated, and we'll take a look at the final output here, the ultimate final value that user will have after investing. So let's run the program and see what the output screen will look like. So here, the program will tell you how much money you will earn for an investment part, and then please enter the required details, and then enter initial amount. Let's say from the question 3,000, and the number of years 10, and then the interest rate is 5.5. So at the end of the first year, the user will have 3,000 plus 3,000 times 0.055, which is $3,165. And then at the end of year 2, the user will have 3,165 plus 3,165 times 0.055, which is $3,339.07. And this is the looping part here. If you remember, this is the looping part, and once the value of j is more than the year, the loop will be terminated, and the final output will be shown here. At the end of 10 years, user will have $5,124.43. So I can say that the program is successful. So that's it. Thank you.